Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural event of Historic Preservation Month 2020. I am deeply honored to get to be the the resounding first shot in this whole exciting experiment this year. So, welcome. We are broadcasting live to our Facebook page and our YouTube. If anyone has any comments or problems at any point, please let us know in the comments. We will be monitoring them the whole time. And so far, it looks like everything's going well. My name is Chris Staudinger. I will be your guide for the evening. And as I mentioned, this is the first event of Historic Preservation Month. This is our first year doing anything like this. For the last couple of years, we've been very fortunate to partner with the City of Tacoma's Historic Preservation Office, and they have requested that we do these free historic tours for the betterment of Tacoma. And this year, we are going to be doing them all virtually. So it's a new experiment for all of us, but this is one that I've wanted to do for a long period of time, and it just happened to work out perfectly, because there is an overwhelming amount of sacred spaces in the city of Tacoma. And as a walking tour provider, it was next to impossible to figure out the logistics of how to do something like this until, hey presto, pandemic. So now that you're all at home watching on your screens, it's an excellent opportunity to show you all of the places in Tacoma that we could think of. I will give you a fair warning right now. Because of my grand enthusiasm for this project and just how many spaces there are, I was not able to cover all of them. I'm just going to let you know right now. My hope is that this is a project that can be ongoing and that we'll be able to release more and more throughout the year. But we are going to give you the sample platter tonight. The other thing is I have just hours of footage now. From going and exploring all these different spaces, I've cobbled together just hours and hours of 360 footage, digital fly-throughs, aerial footage, whatever. And I will be releasing that periodically throughout the week and beyond, so that if you are interested in a more in-depth look at some of these places, we'll be providing that information to you. I just don't want you to expect everything tonight and either walk away from this at the end being like, oh, I thought this would be a 6-hour tour. Or at the end of this be like, I was really afraid this would be a 6-hour tour. So there we go. I would also like to take a brief moment to just thank our sponsors. So the City of Tacoma, as I mentioned, does Historic Preservation Month. And this is it. Welcome to May. Unbelievably, we're already here. There's quite a few incredible upcoming events. We're going to make sure that we post this calendar of events up on our website after the tour as well. And I imagine there is a representative from Historic Preservation who's going to put up a link as well. So we'll make sure that everyone gets on that bandwagon and knows everything that's coming up. Also, it looks like we're getting some information right now that there might not be a YouTube feed going out live right now, which means that it's probably just got a little bit of a backlog and delay. But I do want everyone to know that if you aren't watching live right now, this will be published immediately after the tour to our Facebook account, to our YouTube page, to our website at prettygrittytours.com, and I believe to the city Facebook page. So rest assured, you're going to have an opportunity to see it. Other than that, I think I've covered all the housekeeping items, other than to say, if you enjoy your tour tonight and you feel the generous need to donate, we do have a PayPal tip button on the homepage of prettygrittytours.com. Pretty Gritty Tours is currently existing solely through the generous sponsorship of the City of Tacoma and through the generosity of viewers like you. So thank you guys so much. If you're ready, I think we should jump on out. Maybe go explore the grand city of Tacoma and its many, sacred spaces. I forgot. I would also like to thank Historic Tacoma. Historic Tacoma has compiled, it's like the Oscars up here. I'm running out of time and I still have people to thank. Historic Tacoma has compiled what I personally think is the most currently comprehensive material of sacred spaces in Tacoma. And so we are actually going to share the link to that as well. I'm trying to see if I have it available right now. But by the end of the tour for certain, we're going to have the Historic Tacoma PDF of historic spaces and what they've covered available online. So whoop, whoop, here we go. Let's take a look. Let's take a look, my friends, and start with one of my favorites. Welcome to Old St. Peter's. Now, Old St. Peter's is in Old Town, Tacoma, and it's such a cool church for so many reasons. Let's start with the best. It was built in 1873, and at the time, the people in Tacoma were just like, lumberjacks, mill workers, railroad workers, fishermen, sort of living in an old west town. And the church was essentially just a canvas tent that people would go to. And so a bishop was going to come to Tacoma and visit, and they're like, oh, shoot, we should probably build a church. And so they did in 7 days. 1873, built a church in 7 days. And the best part for me is that after the church was completed, they had been donated a bell from Philadelphia. And I think it was like 875 pounds. And so they were like, well, what do we do? Do we build a bell tower? And someone was like, I've got an idea. Why don't we just chop the top off of this tree? And so they did. The tree that was immediately adjacent to the church, they just topped it and then put the bell on top and flew it up with the skillful help of all the sailors who were down in the port. And they just rigged it up and sailed it up there. What is remarkable about that story, other than the obvious facts, is that from there on out, for 61 years, Old St. Peter's had the record of being the oldest church tower in America. And in case you're wondering what that's about, because the fir tree that they topped was technically 300 years old, approximately, when they turned it into a bell tower, it was the oldest bell tower in America. And so it held that record, legit, for 61 years until, unfortunately, the wood rotted away. And so they replaced it at one point with a cedar pole, and then from there, they ended up replacing it with a metal derrick. So this is the church as it is today. As you can see, it is a modest structure, but certainly full of the spirit and definitely of a great deal of heart. And as the oldest church and once the owner of the oldest bell tower in America, it carries a reputation that is grander than the structure itself, perhaps. If you're ever down in Old Town, it's one of the places that I always like to recommend to people because in true Tacoma fashion, it's remarkably unassuming, but the history and the gravity of it is palpable. So, one of my favorites, and I think it's the perfect one to start off with because it's bite-sized, it's the oldest, and it sort of anchors us in the narrative of tonight. Which brings me to another very old church in the city of Tacoma. So what you're looking at right here is St. Luke's Memorial Episcopal Church in its original location in downtown Tacoma. So here's where things get a little extraordinary for this one as well. This was a passion project essentially by Charles Wright. And if you don't know the name Charles Wright, you're probably not from Tacoma or not here long enough yet. Charles Wright was one of the major founding benefactors for the city, to which so many things bear his name, like the Charles Wright Academy, Annie Wright School. So many, I can't even go on and on about it. Wright Park. All these places belong to the right legacy, but I think maybe more than any of them, there's a stronger emotional tie to St. Luke's here. So take a look at it again. The church was pretty highly successful in the beginning, but by the 1920s, it saw such a steep decline in membership that it wasn't the featured church that it used to be, and they were going to tear it down. Fortunately, enough people got together and they're like, we really got to save this structure, that the decision was made to move it to its current location on Gove Street. And they did it piece by piece. So you're looking at the mayor of Tacoma here giving a speech as they're moving this church, and they numbered each stone by hand and then carried them one by one to the new location and rebuilt the church with very few modifications. They actually enlarged it by a marginal degree, but aside from that span where they had to put new Wilkinson sandstone in, it is in every way the original structure that you would have seen here. And we've got some sweet footage of it that I want you guys to see here. One of the things that I love about this church so much is that it has an architecture style that you wouldn't see on a larger church. They put a lot of different sort of eclectic elements in it. For example, there's like jagged and then smooth stones all on the wall. They tried to do these really steep windows throughout. And if it was on a large cathedral or something, for example, it would almost be too noisy. But because it's such a dainty structure, they got away with it. Now, I got the opportunity to actually fly through the sanctuary here, and you can see the thing that's so immediately present about it is just how tall it is, right? Especially having been built in 1873, 1874, it was a massive endeavor. Now, as you go up towards the altar here, there's alcoves on either side of it, and in a second, we're going to turn to the right, and you'll get to see my favorite one because it has the original marble baptismal font in it. And I asked them how they moved it when they did baptisms, and they don't. It's actually in its same location. They never move this sucker because it's so heavy. So they sort of just shuffle everyone to the side for baptisms, which I think is pretty sweet. The other thing that I love about this building so much is the bell tower. So we're going to actually take you guys around the corner here and then up into the bell tower. And it has the original bell still inside. And you sort of have to go up these dangerously narrow steps. Even for me, it was a little bit of a challenge. And it goes up to the first level where the actual rope is so that all the acolytes get the opportunity to ring the bell, which I'm told is the absolute best part of being an acolyte here. And it still has that sort of modern feel to it here, but then as we curve up to the secondary staircase, you can see that it really gets that rough stone feel, and definitely has a little bit more of an abandoned vibe. In fact, in a second, as I start to fly through up there, you'll notice my hesitation as I encounter the largest cluster of spider webs that I'd seen in quite some time, and having an ongoing feud with the giant house spider every now and then. It's like the snakes to my Indiana. So you can also see just the beauty of that exterior with all the stone here and this tiny little courtyard on the exterior of the building there. It's like every new angle offers some really cool look at this building. So here we go up into the belfry. My hesitation is, I'm like, is it worth it to explore this? Am I really that curious? Absolutely. If someone gives you the opportunity to explore a tower that nobody goes into, you take that opportunity. So here we are up at the top. You can see the pipe that carries the rope so you can manually ring the bell. And then just up past that second floor, if you go up a ladder, you would be in the main bell tower itself. And yes, if you're curious, the bell is still up there. It is the original bell. and we're going to go up one more staircase to take a look up there. Now, you should know about me, one of my great passions in life is church bell towers. More spiders. Truly hate it. A lot of churches would build a bell tower as soon as the church was built, even if they didn't yet have the funds for a bell. And then, maybe 60% of them, and I'm being generous here, would end up getting a bell. So you find a lot of these bell towers that are unoccupied. And so I'm always curious who has an actual bell up there or not. So if you want to take a look at it, here you go. We managed to get some aerial of the building, so we're going to fly down because I think that's just a sweet angle of the building. And then you'll actually get to see the bell here in a second, just a little peek of it as it's up there. Interesting side note to this whole thing, a huge majority of the bells in Tacoma were cast in Philadelphia. As you may know from the Liberty Bell, they were something of an accomplished bell-making city, and so a lot of them ended up here in Tacoma, including the one at Old St. Gregory in Old Town Tacoma there where we first saw it. There we go. Okay. I see that some of you are expecting a pop-up scare. Not this tour, I promise. If you've been on any of our ghost tours, you know how malicious I can be about those, but not tonight, my friends. Not tonight. So while we're talking about churches that have been saved from the brink of destruction, it only makes sense that we should have a moment to discuss Holy Rosary. So, again, if you're not familiar with it, Holy Rosary is, for me, the definitive skyline landmark of Tacoma. It is a Catholic church here. It was built in 1920. I think is the official. It's always hard to judge from cornerstone to completion date, but let's say 1920 for this one. But it was actually founded earlier in 1891. And interestingly enough, it was done so by German Catholics. There were a surprising amount of German Catholics who wanted to be able to hear a service in their native tongue. So they were like, hey, let's build a Catholic church. And hey presto, they did. Stained glass windows, I believe, were all imported from Belgium. There's some discrepancy on the narration of that, but I know that there are devout Tacoma historians who will jump on and catch this one way or the other. But yes, this is the iconic cathedral that you can see from I-5. It's currently in the midst of a program to save it. In, I think it was 2016 or 18, I forget which one, a piece of plaster fell out of the ceiling and landed in the choir loft. And that's when it alerted everyone to the fact that they should probably take a look at the roof and ceiling, and they discovered just significant damage that had gone undetected for a period of time. And the price tag to fix it is in the millions. So we actually put in our post and our feeds on Facebook a link to the actual site about this. There's a massive grassroots effort to save this church. And it's actually been very successful thus far. We're getting very close to being able to save it. And then there's loftier goals to refurbish it and then to actually bring it to a level where it will be safe for all times. And one of the things that's kind of cool about that narrative too is that on the far off levels, beyond just preserving it for the city, which is very topical during Historic Preservation Month, is talk about modernizing it a little bit so that it's more comfortable. And it is the first church that I know of in the city of Tacoma that used electric heat. Almost every other structure in Tacoma used steam heat, specifically because it was so cheap and affordable here. But as the first grand religious structure to heat the entire space with electric heat, they were kind of scoffed at in the beginning. But it turns out they were way ahead of the curve. And as you can see, it has maintained itself as just a truly gorgeous building. But they haven't been able to have services in here for a couple years. They moved everyone next door to their outbuilding. And the hope is to save this structure. It's a project I'm particularly passionate about as someone who cares deeply about the narrative of Tacoma. Losing a building like this from the skyline would be devastating. So here we go. Also, I noticed that someone brought up the fact that they thought I wasn't drinking for this tour, which, come on, you guys know me by now. Tonight's tour is also brought to you by Mac and Jack's African Amber. Finally, for the first time ever, in a can. As the child of a Lutheran pastor, it only makes sense that I would be drinking during a sacred tour. I still love Jesus, but I do drink a little. Shall we continue on our journey tonight? Let's. One of the most beautiful and well-recognized churches, certainly in North Tacoma, is the Church of St. Patrick from 1906, which is what you're looking at right here. St. Patrick here, this is what you would be looking at today, and I've got a really beautiful aerial shot of it here for you. And this is another one that was built specifically to serve the ever-growing sort of Catholic boom that was coming to Tacoma. Again, built of that gorgeous and local Wilkinson sandstone. And it was originally designed to seat, I think, approximately 800 people. But I think you could upgrade it to 1,000 if you used sort of the outlying areas there. And what I love about this one is the peace garden on the side of it, which you're about to get a look at right there. The interior is stunning. It's got that juxtaposition of light on the airy upper parts and then the dark of the pews down there. And I believe both the back section as well as the altar are made of the same white marble. And it's really just a striking building. The stained glass is all original to the building as well, and is some of the most vibrant I've encountered in the city. And when you're at the main entrance there, looking down into the sanctuary, it's a truly majestic sight in the city of Tacoma. One of the things I think is notable about it too is their education program. So many of the people, certainly in my personal circle, have been in some way affiliated with the religious and secular teachings that have gone on there. So they've either gone to preschool or beyond. So it's one of the churches that I think has, as do they all really, but definitely gets a lot of credit just from personal anecdotes of being very tied to the community. And because it's in the position that it is, it really stands out on the hill up there in North Tacoma. Which is an interesting point, too, when you think about Old St. Gregory as well, because that was the tallest part of Tacoma for a while. It had an unimpeded view of the waterfront there. The tower was lofty, and there was nothing in its way, so it was an icon for the city. And certainly has maintained, I think, that stature about it, even though it does get sort of dwarfed now by the surrounding area. So we've talked about St. Patrick. For me, it's important when we're talking about the sacred spaces in Tacoma to be as diverse as possible in that, because there's a lot that don't always get the recognition that they should, specifically because they don't look as grand on the outside and they're not a Catholic church, for example. So I do want to talk to you guys tonight as well about Temple Bethel. Temple Bethel is a Jewish synagogue in the city of Tacoma. It was built in 1968 and is such a beautiful building on the inside. The exterior, I'm personally really fond of. I'm sorry, I do keep calling it St. Gregory's, don't I? It is St. Peter's. I'm not saying that's the Mac and Jack's talking. I'm just letting you know. I've gone through so many churches and religious structures over the past 2 weeks that if I ever misstep, please just let me know in the comments. I'm very happy to amend myself. So here we go. Temple Beth-El. As the largest functioning Jewish synagogue in the city of Tacoma, it's the interior that I think is particularly grand, even though the exterior itself is pretty fascinating as well. As you enter the building, it has a timeline of the Jewish story printed underneath the eaves, and so you're walking through that narrative as you enter the building. And then as you can see in the main prayer room here, the definitive feature is that column straight ahead. And to give you guys a better look at it, I've got, see if I can bring this up really quick. Here we go. So hopefully I don't overwhelm my system here, but they have the ability to actually look at this in 360. So if you go to Synagogues 360, we'll put the link in the comments here in a little bit. You can actually fly through this space and see just how beautiful it really is. And it's mirrored, right? So that section in the middle there is a series of dark cedar panels, and right down in the center, I don't know if you can see it, there's an opening where the holy text is kept. So let's see if I can actually fly back to my static pictures here. And it's mirrored, so as you enter the building, before you go into the main prayer room, you can still see in the center there that tall cedar column. And it's also a narrative timeline, so it tells the stories of the Jewish people as you go through. And each panel is a different narrative in there. And right there at the bottom, near those sort of Chihuly glass looking burning bushes in the middle, that section opens up and the Torah is kept inside. I'm trying to see if I can get you guys a better look at it. So there you go. And they wanted to do this as an homage to the narrative coming to the Pacific Northwest. So that's why it's done in that dark cedar there in the section. But then everything else is the telling of the story, which I think is just such an awesome way to do the building. While the sort of story of the synagogues populating into the city of Tacoma can be traced back to 1872, it took a long time to get a centralized location here. And so it wasn't until the 1960s that we see this building, Temple Beth-El, pop into existence. And its design reflects that because it was built at a time when everyone drove. So they really wanted a holy space where you could put a lot of parking. Genius. So it's got that drive up vibe to it, but then once you enter it, it has that really cool blend of Pacific Northwest modern, but traditional synagogue feel to it as well. Absolutely love it. We've got a ton on that one, but I'm still trying to be judicious in my use of time tonight because we have so many cool places. And like I said, I'm really just trying to give you guys good information about a lot of these, give you an awesome opportunity to look inside some of them that you wouldn't normally get, and then hopefully be able to put out more and more footage as the week goes on so that you can take a more in-depth look at any of these places that piques your interest. And if they all do, well, congratulations, we've got a lot of footage. One of my particular favorites in Tacoma that not many people know about, down on 74th, is Se Musa Temple. And this was built pretty late in the game. You know, when we're talking about historic structures in the area, we're talking about like the 1870s, the early 1900s. This particular temple which means Beautiful Temple of the West, is really iconic of the movement of the Korean immigrants coming to this area of Tacoma. And as more and more were arriving here, they eventually invited a Buddhist monk to come here. And he was like, okay, if you guys are interested, we can build and essentially consecrate a temple here. And so in, I believe it was 1873, I want to double check my numbers on this one here. This was built in the area. And so it's very traditional to Korean temples. And I've got a Google map look at it here, so you can kind of get a look at where it is on 72nd. But it's going to take me a second to dial out to it. Here we go. So it's pretty grand in that if you were out on 72nd, you could easily pass by it. It's just sort of in a suburban area out there. But when you fly into it, it's truly a beautiful structure, and it's a Buddhist temple, like I mentioned, in the Korean tradition, which really emphasizes a lot of the color. What I love about all the temples that I got to see in Korea and the one that we have here is just the vibrancy underneath. The roof is usually done in this traditional black shingling, but underneath you just get this explosion of color. And it was a community effort to really put this in place by a lot of those Korean nationals that wanted a place where they could worship that felt like home. And after it was constructed, it became a place that people of all walks of life ended up feeling very at home. So I've just checked my math here. It is 1983. There was surprisingly little information about its founding, and we're still doing research on it. But yeah, the best information that we found on it is actually from a book called Han in the Upper Left, which is a book about Korean immigration to the Pacific Northwest. And they have some brief notes about the founding of the temple and how it was truly a passion project of the Korean people in Tacoma, wanting to have a place that they could feel anchored and rooted in. Which is the perfect opportunity to take you guys to another Buddhist temple in the Tacoma area that never really gets mentioned. Just across the street, essentially, from the Salishan neighborhood, which, if you don't know anything about, we do have a great tour on Salishan that I'm considering doing as a virtual tour coming up here soon. But essentially, it was a neighborhood that was built for World War II, and it was a rapidly constructed area that brought in a lot of people very quickly and has been a major area of immigration in Tacoma ever since. And one of the major populations that has come to live there are people from Cambodia. And that influx of people from Cambodia led to a desire to have a place to worship. So Khmer Theravada is a Cambodian-style Buddhist temple in South Tacoma. This was also constructed in 1983, and I think there's a parallel to the two big Buddhist temples finally finding a place here in Tacoma in the 1980s. So Khmer Theravada is another very colorful structure, but you can see it's got a much more open layout and definitely has a distinct Cambodian vibe as opposed to the Korean temple that we got to see earlier. And while both are Buddhist, obviously there's a switch and some very distinct differences between the two. Now, this one was actually built, the president of the foundation built it in 1983. In that house that you see in the back there, he got that house and a 3-acre lot, and then just through donations constructed the temple out here. And while it's seen ups and downs throughout the years, it is still functional out there and is still servicing not just the Cambodian population in Tacoma, but also people from the Buddhist walks of life throughout the greater Tacoma area as well. And this is exactly what it looks like today. So if you get the opportunity, again, it's right across from Salishan. Really go check it out. It's one of the more beautiful sacred spaces out there as well, but I think it gets overlooked frequently because it doesn't fit into the more common narrative of sacred spaces in the area. Which brings us back to more common narratives in the area. It would be remiss of me to have a sacred spaces tour and not at least briefly touch on the fact that one of the most daunting, gorgeous, and traditional structures in the area, depending on your definition of traditional, is First Presbyterian. So this structure is from 1925. If you've been in the Stadium District, you have no doubt seen it. It is a massive building. And it's most iconic, I think, for these round windows on the side there. Here's an interior look of them. But also the tower. So the building itself, like I said, 1925, and it was, I think, like $500,000 at the time that it was constructed by a Boston architect, Ralph Cram, and it was very traditional Presbyterian at the time, although I believe the church made a formal petition to leave the Presbyterian movement, and they've joined a more open sort of set in 2012. I believe Covenant Order of Evangelical Presbyterian, if I'm not mistaken. But my expertise right now is the building. And what's so cool about it, like I said, is the tower itself. So let's see, I've got a cool aerial shot for you guys here. So like so many of these great churches, it has a pipe organ. This one in particular is from St. Louis. And then the tower is got these symbols on the top of it. And I'm trying to remember just how many there are, but each one has a different meaning to it. I believe there are 8 symbols up on the top. So there's a 5-pointed star, a 6-pointed star, 7-pointed star, the Greek cross, a symbol for the Trinity, a square that represents earthly life. The church has a book, which we're going to put up online here, that explains what each of these secret symbols up on the top of the tower actually means. And then the weather vane I love because it's actually mounted on a gold ball, and that was a design to prevent it from snapping off in a windstorm. So if the wind gets really intense, the gold ball that it's mounted on will just pivot enough, and then after the wind is done, it rights itself back to the top. Also, I don't know if you got to see it on the tower there, the 4 Gospels are represented on either side of it, and it does still have the bells up and top as well. Now, when you look at the building, you'll notice that the interior is so incredibly tall, 65 feet, I believe, from ground floor of the sanctuary up to the top there. And the most impressive part for me are those round windows on the parts of the sanctuary up there. What I really love about it, other than the fact that it's kind of unique in being a brick church, since we have so many of the sandstone ones in the area, is that it's got just sort of a like, I'm not going to describe it as mission-esque because we actually have a mission-style church, but it definitely has a European vibe to it, to me. And not being an architecture expert, that's just my personal opinion. I don't want to offend anyone right now. But what I love is the warmth of it from the brick and the lighting and the stained glass. It's just got a really good feel. Now, the outbuilding that you can see to the left of this picture is part of the grounds now, and it's used as an office building for the church. It did used to be a mortuary for a period of time. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but it definitely has got some haunted history to it, and that's according to the groundskeeper, which wasn't off record, so you guys can make up your own mind about that. But certainly something that will be saved for a future tour, and definitely worth looking into more. I'm going to hopefully have more footage of this building for you guys soon because it was so expansive. And there's just so much to talk about with each section of it. I really want it to sort of be its own thing, but I wanted you guys to at least get the chance to look at it because it is an iconic part of the stadium district, and it was the most important part of the skyline for a period of time. Before all the apartment buildings came into the stadium district, First Presbyterian here was the thing that ships would see as they were coming in to Tacoma. And as you could probably see from that aerial footage there, even today it has a dominating view of the waterfront, certainly from the tower. And you can see Port of Tacoma as a clear shot down there. It's truly exceptional. And the fact that we still have it as part of the Grand Tacoma skyline is, I think, a source of pride, or should be, for all of us. So we're going to transition now to one of the largest, if not the largest, churches, sacred spaces, religious structures in the city of Tacoma. And I'm actually going to, in a rare move, let them speak for themselves.
I'm Jennifer Dean, and I'm the Director of Operations here at Urban Grace. Urban Grace is an active church. We have services every week. We run just like a normal church, but we're only about 150 people. We have a 40,000 square foot building that was built in the 20s. The building is much bigger than what the church needs. So several years ago, we decided that really the only way that our church could stay in this great historic building was to begin using it for the community. Currently, we have about 15 offices that are filled with social service groups, education groups, nonprofits, and arts groups. The building is primarily about 85% of its usage is non-church related. We think that's fabulous. We open our doors for lots of different events, the normal kind of stuff like weddings and memorial services and stuff like that, but also lectures with the library or book signing tours or dance performances. We have great partnerships with the Tacoma Youth Symphony. They've been here for years. One of our offices here is the Tacoma Farmers Market. One of the reasons that Urban Grace uses its building like it does is because we really believe that the church isn't solely for itself, that it's important that we're part of our community, that the community would know that this place is a safe place, that they may come here many times for different events or meeting with different people that has nothing to do with church. And lots of the folks that come through here have no interest in church or would have never been in a church if it wasn't for some of the other things that are happening in this building. And we think that's really great. We think that if Urban Grace can have the kind of reputation in the community that people would say, oh, hey, I know that place. I went to a really important discussion about race in that building, or I went and saw my granddaughter's dance performance in that building, that people will then associate really great community things with our church and with who we are. We're already doing great things, and I hope that can just deepen and widen over the next several years or decades or however long we're privileged to be in this building.
So, thank you, Urban Grace, for doing the heavy lifting for me on that one. What's cool about Urban Grace, or as it used to be, First Baptist Church, is that the mission statement has always been the same. As she mentioned, the building is massive, and the design of that was intentional. From the very beginning, First Baptist was intended to be used for the community. And you get to see just how obvious that is when you look at the interior of it. So the auditorium has a seating of 1,250 people, and clearly they use it. A lot of local organizations and film festivals and plays and productions are done inside Urban Grace, specifically because it has the space to do it. Office space, retail space, community outreach, compassion programs are all held within that building, and it's designed that way. and its centralized location in downtown Tacoma was pivotal to that. When they originally built it in the 1920s, 1923, I believe, the intention was to be a community gathering center, not just a church. Or, I guess you could make the argument, very specifically a church in its community outreach programs. When you're looking at it today, you can tell from the historic photos that it is in so many ways exactly the way that it used to be, aside from the fact that the streets used to be a little bit wider. But the building itself has always been gorgeous, huge, and very specifically designed to nestle into the hillside there. It's not at all unique in the fact that it was designed to surmount the obstacle of the Great Tacoma Hill. A few of the churches that we've talked about today, and the one that we're about to talk about next, are very much designed to sort of nestle on the hill in that way that they, A, won't slide off, and B, won't look strange doing it. No, we're not going to talk about it next. I'm going to save it for a second. Before we move on to one of my favorite churches architecturally, I do want to talk about a few of the other ones in the area. So I think one of the big sacred spaces that always gets overlooked is actually the Islamic Center of Tacoma. And while it is not the rich architecture that you've experienced with some of these, it is very important to the fabric of the community and to the narrative overall. And like both the Cambodian Buddhist temple and the Korean Buddhist temple, it was established in the 1980s, 1981. So Islamic Center of Tacoma is in West Tacoma as you're going towards the Narrows Bridge out there. And as you can see, it is a dainty structure. I think this capacity is 50. It's not large. And it is an unassuming space from the outside and sort of a modest one on the inside. But it does house the largest portion of the Islamic community in Tacoma and has done so since the 1980s. And because of its position over there, it has become a major gathering point for festivals and celebrations in that area, and maintains its anchor as the large mosque for the city of Tacoma. And like I said, it gets overlooked very frequently, so I think it's important to give a nod to it at least. And it's one of the ones that we hope to have some more information on soon. Unfortunately, I did reach out to them to get some more footage right in the middle of Ramadan, so we were a little limited on that one. If you're wondering why certain iconic religious structures were not featured heavily in this tour tonight, it could be because I got the green light on a few of these during Easter week. So yeah, not everyone was prepared for me to come in and crash their party right in the middle of pandemic Easter Ramadan. Strangely enough. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it would be wrong of me, considering my upbringing as the son of a Lutheran pastor, to not at least talk about one Lutheran church in the area. And since there are so many beautiful ones, it was sort of a spin of the dial which one to talk about tonight. But I chose Peace Lutheran. So Peace Lutheran, if you're familiar with it, was established 1909. This one by German Russians. We're sort of in the Cushman area, and it's in Hilltop. So it's always been sort of a vibrant, eclectic community. These are original historic photos of it, and you'll notice on the tower up there, that zigzag, that is the only zigzag roof that I know of on any church that I've ever encountered, certainly in the Tacoma area. And it was a very strong Lutheran church up through, I'm going to say the 1960s, I think was sort of the turning point. And then it saw a sharp decline until the 1970s. They started to kick back up and really found their stride in the 1990s during sort of the peak of violence in the Hilltop area, they became, like so many churches in Hilltop, an anchor for the community. And today, they still offer a huge amount of community programs right down there, but also every week they just have an open session where if you come, you will be fed. And they're really big on feeding the community and providing a safe and contemplative space for people to retreat if they need it. And you can see from that picture, which I have just sent away from my console here, that while it's not exactly the way you remember it, so this is the original 1909 structure, they have kept all of that original structure. They've merely added to it. So you can see they've just, like their hearts, they have grown. But it still serves a thriving congregation in the area. And I think it is one of the more Lutheran-looking churches in the area. I adore First Lutheran right across from Wright Park, but as a true Lutheran church, it should have that bare Nordic German Reformation sort of interior, and then that unassuming exterior. Personal opinion. Again, not an architecture expert, but I do have opinions on things. So if we're going to transition briefly to a different church, I want to talk to you guys about, it's currently called Unity of South Sound, but that wasn't always the name of it. Unity of South Sound used to be the Epworth-LaSword United Methodist Church. It is located just off of 6th Avenue, very close to 6th Ave Baptist, which I talk about in a lot of my tours, so I wanted to focus on this particular one because it's tucked away and rarely gets recognition. So we have some video from it here, if I can bring it up for you guys. Oops, that's me. Here we go. Wait, nope, still me. Let's see if I can. There we go. So Epworth-LaSword United Methodist Church, which from here on out I'm going to refer to as Unity of South Sound, which is its functional name as a church today. It was a 1926 church, and it's named after Epworth, England, which I believe, unless I'm mistaken, is the birthplace of the founder of Methodism. And so maintaining that Methodist vibe, it is a very large structure, but it was designed, not unlike Urban Grace, to be a community organization as well. So while the sanctuary and the bell tower are the commanding aspects of it, it has a ballroom, education center. Oh, see, I couldn't help myself. I had to explore another bell tower. It has this tiny sanctuary space just off the side of the main sanctuary. And then you can see a big part of the facility are community rooms like this. So there's a 3-story part of the building that's just used for offices on the side, and has been used for classrooms, community outreach, community events, reading rooms, education, you name it. That's a big part of that building. But the sanctuary itself is one of the more beautiful. And what I love about these stained glass windows here is they're all original. And then as time went on and they found themselves in disrepair or getting shabby and dirty, the congregation wanted to refurbish them, but they didn't have the money for it. So just purely a volunteer effort, and I believe in the 1940s, they took them down one by one as they had time and effort, cleaned them, repaired them as best they could, and then reinstalled them. And you can see between the brownstone on the walls and the stained glass, you get that super rich honeyed light coming through the window. that I am a big, big fan of. Well, we've done some really good coverage tonight. There is, I'm double checking my list here. There's one more church that I really want to take you guys to before I cut you loose tonight. And it is Emmanuel Presbyterian. Emmanuel Presbyterian was built in 1908 and is the only example of that mission architecture in the area. And so if you're in North Tacoma and you're driving around and you see it, you're like, is the Mask of Zorro filmed here? What's going on? And it is an extraordinary building that I am going to show you right now. So it's got that Spanish mission feel to it, like I mentioned. And in 1908, that was sort of in vogue. You can see it also has its original stained glass windows from the exterior here. And the tower is unique because it's at the back of the building. And it is at the back of the building because it's on the hill. And so to make everything structurally sound and for it just to make logistic sense at all, they had to put the tower at the downhill portion of the church, which is extraordinary. That was their reasoning behind it, and I love it. So I believe this is classified as Mission Revival, and it was designed to seat 400 people, which it currently can do. And the main focus up there is the choir section. The other thing that you'll notice about it is the juxtaposition of the light and the dark with the very cerulean or azure, as some people might say, windows. So it's just got that rich vibe to it on the inside there. And this outbuilding that you're looking at right here was designed as a smaller sanctuary to be adjacent to this courtyard. So the two buildings to the side were both owned by the church originally. Now they only use one of them as offices and sold the other as a private residence. Following my love of going up into bell towers, we went up that shady staircase there and then into the bell tower of Emmanuel Presbyterian, which, as you may have noticed, is not a bell tower at all. It was never designed to have a bell, and it never has had one inside of it, to the best of my research and knowledge. But it still has that tower aspect to it, which is very Mission Revival, as the kids are saying these days. And it's interesting that they never had it in there. They can play bell sounds from the organ inside, but they don't have one up there. And like I said, to the best of my knowledge, never have. But it is more of an observation tower. You might have seen from the aerial footage there, it's got an unparalleled view of Commencement Bay from North Tacoma. And you can see from this angle here, a lot of that's due to that slope. Like it almost has a drawbridge up at the top there, which again is atypical because it's on a slope. They went from what would normally have been a staircase leading up to the church to using that slope leading up to it. But I love it with that mission vibe to it because it's iconic of that sort of Spanish-Italian feel that you see in a lot of the iconic buildings that we still have from that period in Tacoma, but it's the only one that is a church in the area. So it is a diamond in the rough, in my personal opinion. So with that, we have gone on what I think is a fairly robust tour of some of the sacred spaces in Tacoma. And again, this is just the first part. I would like to be able to offer you guys the chance to explore more of these in depth and to continue to do it. So for my part, I'm going to continue to offer weekly updates about sacred spaces throughout Tacoma, hopefully throughout the year. All of the places that you've seen tonight, as we assemble more comprehensive footage and fly-throughs, those will be available on our Facebook page. So if you're interested in those, stay tuned. Make sure you like the page. We'll be putting them up. The City of Tacoma's Historic Preservation Office is always phenomenal about sharing just historic information in general. And so they've been very good about promoting all these places, and I'm sure you'll see more and more from them as well, which is a good chance to remind you that there are quite a lot of exciting events coming up for May's Historic Preservation Month. Again, we're going to put that calendar up online. I imagine if Lauren hasn't already, she's going to put it up on both our Facebook page and Tacoma Preservation's page, so you'll be seeing a lot. Our next one is actually on Tuesday with our virtual tour of Wright Park, so be sure to stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. I'm excited to get outside a little bit. Well, thank you guys for joining us for this tour. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Again, if you've enjoyed yourself enough to show that appreciation, we do have a PayPal link on the front page of prettygrittytours.com. I thank you guys for anything, but above all, your time and preserving the legacy and the story of Tacoma, which is our ultimate mission here. So thank you guys. I'm Chris Staudinger. I'll see you guys out there. Stay safe and keep exploring.